Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the Hori prototype, which is the first Japanese rank 4 battle rating 6.0 premium tank. Now, first of all, I apologize for the sound quality. I desperately tried to make it better, but there is currently not that much that I can do about it. So I hope you stay with me despite the rather poor sound quality. But back to the Hori prototype. Now, the immediate question is, as a premium tank, is it worth it? Well, the tank itself, yes, but in conjunction with the remaining Japanese tanks, you might find it difficult because there is no other 6.0 tank. You have the choice to play together with the heavy tank number 6, Chiri 2 and M4A376W, but then again, you artificially up-tier them into an environment where they have more and more difficulties to perform. And also you can think about up-tiering the Hori prototype together with the STA-1, STA-2 and also the M41 Walker Bulldog. All of three have a battle rating of 6.3. But then you have more and more difficulties performing in battle and making your strength work. So what is the Hori prototype in a nutshell? Well, basically it's a modified Ferdinand. People don't know how to shoot it and how to kill it yet. They will also probably struggle in the future due to its very unique characteristics, and overall I like it. I like the gun, I like how the gun performs, I like how the tank performs, and overall they just have modified the Ferdinand in my opinion, and well, they just stripped away a lot of its weaknesses and make it a bit more trollish. But in other news, they also kind of have taken away some of the good strengths about the Ferdinand. Overall, it performs, in my opinion, currently better in the game at 6.0 as the Ferdinand does at 6.7. So without further ado, let's get into the tank review and let's begin with the armor. The upper frontal plate is the first point that I want to point out. It is 75 millimeters thick. That is not too impressive, but the angle of 70 degrees makes it work. Effective thickness is just under 200 millimeters or even exceeds that, down to 175 millimeters depending on the exact angle that you look at it. But 70 degrees, a lot of shells, despite a lot of the rules in War Thunder, will just simply bounce. They will just not penetrate. Even Russian 122 millimeter shells will not go through that. And then there's also the mid plate, 75 millimeters flat, and there a lot of tanks, the overwhelming majority, will penetrate. Then there's also the lower plate, but then again, like this plate, it does not really matter that much. It's not the end of the world if you get penetrated here. I will point out later on why. Then you also see the similarity to the Ferdinand with those side cheeks, 65 millimeters, but then again you see the extreme angle, and also yeah, there you can see it, how it is sloped backwards, nearly again at 70 degrees, so 200 millimeters effective thickness. As long as you don't angle the armor, you will not get penetrated here. The side armor is thinner than on the Ferdinand, 55 just below the tracks, 55 here, and this door is a strong point with 65 millimeters. So overall you have more or less the target area from the Ferdinand, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's mostly a bad thing because a lot of people will penetrate you or find it very easy to hit you in the first place. So when you get flanked, you can get hit very often. And well, the rear is again just 35 millimeters, so AAA food basically, and the rooftop is 35 millimeters. This hatch actually will open if you depress the gun, because the gun with its holdings is mounted very high up in the tank, so the Japanese engineers had to find a way to allow the gun breech to lift up, and this was a very simple solution. So you actually can see inside of the tank, but when I kind of tested it, I found no way to abuse it as an enemy. So for example, shooting from behind and ricochet a shell downwards, or HE shells, bombs, machine guns with aircraft, I think currently it doesn't work, but then again it's such a rare occurrence that you should not really count on it. The surrounding the frame is 20mm like the engine deck, and this is the first weakness, that the engine deck is just 20mm thick. It's a huge target, and you find it very possible that if you catch a rocket directly on it, or an HE shell or a rocket in the front, that it will splash downwards because it's just 20mm. So every 120 to 122 to 128 millimeter, 150, 152 millimeter HE shell will splash down. That's the basic message about this. Then, well, the next trick this tank has is the upper casement. It's not as thick as on the Ferdinand, it's a bit different because the Ferdinand has a continuous 200mm front plate. This tank gets stronger the more you go to the inside. The outer part here is just 120mm thick, but you have this additional panels here that strongly weaken any kind of heat defense shell, but also will reduce kind of the penetration force of APHE shells, and it's symmetrical on both sides. Yet it is still very easily possible to hit this part because it's a horizontal and a vertical weak spot area, so to speak. This frame here is stronger, up to 160mm and 150mm this frame, so that's not too bad. And then this inner part, well, that's basically a Jagdtiger plate. 250mm of cast homogeneous armor, and just APDS and heat defense will go through. Then the scum mantle again here is framed up with 200mm cast homogeneous armor that also has an overlap in a big area with the 250mm. So this area is tricky to shoot. This is also tricky to shoot, and you know, a lot of people don't know how to shoot this tank. So Russian 85mm guns still will easily penetrate here and easily penetrate here. But that's not the end of the world, because the interior, we have 6 crew members like the Ferdinand. And the funny thing is, the driver sits on the left side, unlike on the right side, and then we have a machine gunner that has no job. Well, he's unemployed because there is no machine gun on the entirety of the tank. So yeah, then we also see the transmission in the front, just behind the flat armor plate, that will absorb a lot of shots, much like the engine. And the engine is a huge V12 that sits right between 2 fuel tanks, and also in front of the very prominent ammo rack. And the ammo rack sits very deep in the tank, so very low, and that is a good thing. Those shells here on the side are more or less like the ammo racks on the Ferdinand. If you don't remove them, you're easy prey for any kind of side shots. If you remove them, you have to remove 11 rounds, and both ammo racks are exactly empty, so you have 40 rounds left, which is more than enough to go through the entirety of a battle, and another, and another, and another. Well, you kind of see where I'm going. The hitting area is huge, like on the Ferdinand, but with solid shots or heat defense, there are lots of places, if you remove the ammo rack, where you can penetrate and deal absolutely no damage or just minor damage. Then we also have 2 loaders to the left and to the right of the gun, and also the gunner on the right and the commander on the left, together with the gun breech, which is actually surprisingly small and compact for a 105mm experimental high velocity cannon. So that's practically the basic message. The armor is trollish, the tank is huge, easy to hit, but then again are lots of places where you can penetrate without doing damage. Let's talk about the mobility of the tank, and we can see we have a stronger engine with 550 horsepower than the Ferdinand, and you're just second to the Charioteer. And also weight wise you are kind of in the middle, so you're lighter than the Ferdinand, but well, then heavier than everything else. So your horsepower to ton ratio is kind of average, and it is 10.8. 10.8 is not very fast, so you're miles behind the Charioteer Mark 7, which has nearly double the horsepower to ton ratio, but you are significantly better in this respect than the Ferdinand, the Sture Emil, and to a certain degree also to the Super Pershing, and you're just 0.5 horsepower to ton ratio behind the ISU 122S. However, the driving feels a little bit smoother, a little bit better, and overall I really cannot complain about this. The top speed with 40 kilometers an hour is good enough. On hard terrain you actually will see it, but then again you are second just the Charioteer Mark 7. The reverse speed is a bit disappointing. This is where the similarity to the Ferdinand, or the improvement rather, ends, because the Ferdinand has the fantastic reverse speed to get itself out of positions, which the Hori prototype does not really have as an option. So even the Super Pershing and the ISU 122 are better in this respect, feelable better. The Charioteer Mark 7 has the typical low to mid-tier British problem of non-existent, well, reverse speed. Also, the Hori prototype, unlike the Ferdinand and the Charioteer, lacks neutral steering, so that again is a downgrade. But the big difference to the Ferdinand is that the traverse speed, if you are in everything else but neutral steering, is better. It's significantly better. You don't have the same ground pressure. Overall, it feels like you have 13-ish horsepower to ton ratio. That is the advantage of the relatively low ground pressure. At least it feels like that. You don't feel the length of the tank much you do with the Sture Emil or the Ferdinand if you try to traverse. And now let's talk about the gun. And caliber wise, this tank is with a 105mm experimental high velocity gun right in the middle. Tank destroyers at this battle rating tend to be a little bit overkill, what you find in the tech trees. What you find actually on the battlefield has most of the time less caliber. So the Ferdinand with its recently buffed 88 in terms of rate of fire is well, still a force to be reckoned with. Also the Sture Emil with its brutal K40 gun with 128mm that makes no prisoners whatsoever. And then again, I also want to compare it to the Super Pershing's 90mm because it shows just how good the 105 is compared to the American long-barreled 90mm. And also the ISU 122S with its 122mm gun is kind of left in the dust. The shells you have available is in the upper part. 51 rounds is best in class here. Just the Ferdinand comes close, but then again, unlike the Ferdinand, you can remove the prominent ammo racks and you are left with 40 effective, which is more than enough for a single battle. Also, your reload is now where it gets really entertaining. 8.6 seconds for a 105mm gun. And this is not a howitzer, where the propellant charge is, well, separated, or, you have single piece ammunition, you have two loaders, and they do the job. You can see the difference here also to the Ferdinand, which has 22% faster reloads, or 22% less reload time compared to the Hori prototype. The Sture Emil has more than double the reloads, and even the Super Pershing, well, with a lower caliber, has much longer reload, nearly 50%. That is just, well, that's a slap in the face for the Super Pershing. Much like the ISU 122S, which has an improved 122mm D25S cannon in terms of reload. So it's faster, but it's not fast enough. Just the Charioteer is significantly better in this respect together with the Ferdinand. The turret rotation speed of the casemate mounted gun is very bad. It's the worst in this comparison. 6 degrees per second is worst in class by quite some bit. The gun depression, as mentioned before, is minus 10 degrees, gun elevation 20 degrees with an elevation speed throughout the tanks of 4 degrees per second. So yeah, that's you have kind of a good gun, and the gun handling is not extremely bad except for the turret rotation, but that is kind of the flavor of casemate tank destroyers. So let's have a quick look at the shells. And the first shell type is the experimental high explosive shell. It's a 16 kilogram heavy warhead with a muzzle velocity of 920 meters per second. That's really fast for a high explosive shell. So again, experimental high velocity gun, you know. And we have 2.5 kilos of TNT with 30 millimeters of penetration at any angle, at any distance when the trigger gets activated or the fuse gets activated. And I looked it up. This is by quite some bit the best performing 105mm high explosive shell that I've come across, and it outperforms the 10.5 centimeter Target 2 from the Germans, even the T-29 from the Americans, but then also howitzers such as from the Stu 42 from the Germans, which has 22 millimeters of penetration, and even the 105 Sherman with the howitzer has 26 millimeters of penetration. So that's actually for the caliber a pretty good high explosive shell. But then again, it's not that big of a deal because you have also a very good APHE round. The Type 2 APHE shell is a 16 kilogram heavy warhead with a very similar muzzle velocity of 916 meters per second. So it's around about 80 meters per second slower than the APHE shell on the, for example, Long 88 from the Germans. But the TNT equivalent of 200 grams is quite something, or it's pure TNT. And the penetration is 204 millimeters. But it loses penetration by quite something, as at 1,000 meters we just have 160 millimeters of penetration, and at 2,000 meters 123 millimeters. Also, the normalization is not the very best, but then again, you kind of have the caliber with 105 millimeters to fulfill the 30% interaction rule for 80 millimeters. So you will not bounce that often on tanks that you will face, and that's quite nice. So the shell in combination with the reload, well, let me just explain you where exactly you stand. Basically, you have the combination on the Hori prototype's APHE shell of the penetration of the American long-barreled 90mm that you just find on much higher battle rating tanks, such as the T-2061, the Super Pershing, and the T-32, at a battle rating of 6.0, with the basic reload basically of the normal Long 88 from the Germans, and the TNT equivalent of much higher caliber APHE shells. And again, that is just a combination of good reload, decent gun handling for a casemate tank destroyer, enough penetration to deal with the overwhelming majority of tanks that you face, to one-shot them with your TNT equivalent. And even if you do not initiate hull break on every single light vehicle that you encounter, you have much more chance to do so than the, again, American 90mm or the German Long 88. And for those who can't initiate hull break, you can switch in time to the HE shell, especially after you have immobilized them. You have decent armor, you have decent mobility, or rather trollish armor, to get around on the battlefield. Now, with the footage that you've seen in the background and will see in just a moment, it just shows you how trollish this tank is. But then again, I do not guarantee you any further changes to this tank, any battle rating adjustment, or that people will soon learn how to deal with this tank, maybe with the help of this tank review, hopefully. So there is that. And now I wanted to show you this scene here. So there's a PT-76 behind me and I'm so dead, right? So now my engine and my transmission and my tracks are repaired, but he has my back. And you hear it clearly, he fires nothing but heat FS. And he aims for the upper part, so now my, well, now my gun breech is again damaged, but again, he does no real damage to my tank. I tried to drive him back on top of the wall, and he hull breaks himself. I mean, if he had loaded APHE, there might have been a chance that he have killed me, and another shot went through my tank without dealing any damage. I can drive into cover and just simply repair myself and just mark the map section that where the shot most likely came from. Again, repair times are an issue, but that's not what I'm talking about. As you can see, the tank can absorb ridiculous amounts of damage, but then again it might also come down to the enemy not know where to shoot. But all that is futile if if your enemies shoot with APHE into your side. And it took the T-25, again, 2 shots to take me down after I have taken such a considerable beating. So it's not just that the tank feels good, it also, really performs good. So here we are on Abandoned Factory, and this is in fact the very first battle that I played, and this is the very first kill that I made on the AA Mark 1. So I flanked the AAA that was about to capture a point, or did it, but I killed him. And there is a smoke, and I just lie in ambush. Again, I'm not quite sure if the Ferdinand could do this as well. And I take out the Stridswagen 81 with a shot in the turret, and you can see it kills all the crew in there without any hope for them. And yeah, this was in fact the very first battle that I played. I had no idea how this tank would perform. I had no idea what to expect. I just went into the battle and immediately got that feeling that this tank is how it looks, a different Ferdinand. But again, that is not a bad thing. The real big difference to the Ferdinand is that I can react to threats, that I am not that well known to the enemy, that I can go more often into the positions where I can really play my strengths. So a good idea might be to go a little bit hull down to prevent yourself from being tracked, or the engine got knocked out, basically immobilized, and then to keep the gun singing. And again, with a lot of the German long-range damage dealers, you have to know your distances. While the muzzle velocity is good and the scope is good, it is always good to get it to perfection. Know your distances, know your enemies. The tank and the gun will kind of do the rest, but never get flanked, despite the fact that you can absorb damage. So here I captured the point, and I'm always trying to avoid to get shot into the sides. Again, disabling shots might be your death, because then the enemy can go for the second, third and fourth shot before you can repair. So here I see a T-26. I breach through the wall. Again, the weight of the tank together with the kind of horsepower helps you to breach through that faster, and I receive a shot into the side that does no damage whatsoever. And now there are 2 tanks. So please pay attention to how I engage this tank. I go for an angle where he cannot get the gun onto my side, and I shotgun him right into the side. The tank on flat terrain is surprisingly stable for kind of firing on the move. And now I hide myself behind one of those fuel tanks, which is always fun. And I see that there is an American heavy tank. Currently I don't know if it is a T-34 or a T-29. If the T-29 would have shot me, he did not use APHE. So I see that he turns his turret to face the PT-76, and I have a clear shot into the side of his turret and deal massive damage. But then again, I do not get the commander, and I do not ignite the ammunition. I try to get the second shot into the side of the turret, but his gun breech is disabled, so that's why I'm going for the M41 Walker Bulldog, and I get the kill assist on the T-29. He must have shot me either with APCR or with full caliber AP, like the M41 Walker Bulldog. So that were a lot of tough engagements where I just had so much advantage compared to the opponent, and I get a second assist on the snapshot on the FV4202. So I did not see the kill message at the time, that's why I pumped another round into him through the bush, and that's again an advantage that I like. You can shoot through buildings, you can shoot through trees, wooden obstacles, whatnot, which you can't do with Heat FS or Hash, for example. And yeah, that's basically the battle. We cleaned up the area nicely. There are still a few remaining enemy tanks. We possess all 3 capture zones, and I took no damage despite being shot quite a bit. Well, 2 shots so far. Again, it's the empty space of the huge, well, fighting compartment that deceives or locks enemy into just shooting somewhere. And I guess it's a known method to just always try to shoot at the middle of the tank, but the ammo rack lies behind the tracks, very low into the tank. This is something that you always should keep in mind when driving the tank, but also when engaging it. And again, the mobility with the increased maneuverability in comparison to the Ferdinand allowed me to get into the cap circle in time after it was captured by the last enemy tank on the ground, and got then my second capture zone after having received 2 assists and 5 kills. So yeah, that's basically the first battle that I ever played. So here I make a cut, and yeah, let's have a quick look at the post-battle results. Again, 5 kills, 2 assists, 2 capture zones, and I got 74,000 silver lines and 7,396 research points. This is actually something that I like. The income seems to be very consistent, relatively high, and I also got a Survivor award, which I really like. I also was then first in my team with over 2,000 score points, so that tells you that this tank is not bad. But then again, you cannot research tier 6 once they will get eventually available for Japanese tankers. So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Again, please excuse me the audio difficulties that I currently have, and I try to fix it, but yeah, it's not that nice. But anyways, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields and in the skies of War Thunder.